She was just a quiet maid in a billionaire's mansion, invisible, underestimated, and mocked. Until one night she risked her life to save the arrogant heir. What happened next shocked the entire city. Stay with this story because the ending, it's the kind that leaves Lagos speechless. Amaka moved quietly through the Obajemi mansion, blending into the shadows like she had mastered the art of being invisible. She was only 22, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. With a tray balanced carefully in her hands, she delivered breakfast to the kitchen where Madame Obajemi's instructions were always sharp and never kind. "Don't forget to wipe the dining chairs properly this time. No streaks," the head maid barked, barely glancing at her. "Yes, Ma," Amaka replied softly, already moving to grab a clean cloth. She didn't complain. She didn't argue. She simply worked. She had been with the Obajemis for 10 months now, living in the cramped quarters reserved for domestic staff, waking up before the sun and going to bed long after everyone else had. Her salary wasn't much, but every kobo was part of her dream, to one day gain admission into the University of Lagos and study nursing. Her late mother had been a nurse. Amaka wanted to wear the white uniform not because it was prestigious, but because it meant she could help people and finally escape this life of servitude. The only real threat to her peace in the mansion was Dapo, the billionaire's only son. At 26, Dapo was everything people expected of a wealthy heir: handsome, stylish, loud, and completely disconnected from the reality of the people around him. He walked past maids as if they were furniture. Sometimes he even mocked them. Once he had caught Amaka cleaning the floor outside his room and muttered, "How is this one even a human being?" She had looked up at him, blinking quietly, her pride wounded, but her lips sealed. Dapo had money, but he lacked warmth. Everyone around him was afraid to tell him the truth, so he strutted like a king in his own little kingdom, believing he was untouchable. Until that rainy Tuesday evening. The clouds had been threatening all afternoon, but when the downpour finally started, it came with force. Amaka had just finished mopping the sitting room and was heading outside to the gatehouse to check on the guard when she heard shouting from the driveway. Curious, she stepped closer to the window. Dapo was arguing on the phone, pacing back and forth near the gate. The security guards were inside their shed, hiding from the rain, and no one else seemed to notice the black-tinted SUV that had been parked across the street for almost 30 minutes. Amaka noticed. Something about the way the SUV started moving as Dapo stepped closer to the road made her instincts scream. She dropped the tray in her hand and ran outside without thinking. Her slippers flew off as her feet hit the wet concrete. The SUV was picking up speed now, fast. Too fast for a street like theirs. It was aiming straight for Dapo. He didn't see it. He had turned his back, still yelling into the phone. The car wasn't stopping. Amaka didn't shout. She didn't even think. She just ran. In one swift move, she lunged forward and shoved Dapo out of the way with all the strength her petite body could muster. He stumbled, landing hard on the pavement, shocked and confused. But Amaka wasn't so lucky. The car swerved at the last second, but not fast enough. It clipped her shoulder, sending her spinning into the air before she crashed into the metal gate with a sickening thud. The SUV didn't stop. It vanished into the night, tires screeching, water splashing in its wake. Dapo scrambled to his feet, dazed. His phone was lying in a puddle, forgotten. All he could see was the girl he had always ignored, lying in a twisted heap. Her face pale, blood trickling from her forehead. "Someone help!" he screamed, but his voice cracked with something unfamiliar: panic, guilt. The guards rushed out, but it was Dapo who knelt beside her. Amaka, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. She didn't respond. Within minutes, a convoy car was summoned to rush her to the hospital. Dapo sat beside her, holding her hand tightly as if trying to keep her tethered to life. The entire ride was a blur of flashing lights, soaked clothes, and a strange pressure building in his chest. He kept thinking, Why would she do that? Why would a maid risk her life for me? For the first time in his privileged existence, someone had protected him. Not because he was rich or famous or powerful, but simply because she wanted to, and her name was Amaka, the maid he never saw coming. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and silence. Amaka lay still, bandaged and bruised, her eyes fluttering open from time to time, only to close again in exhaustion. The doctors said she would be fine, but it would take time. Fractured shoulder, concussion, bruised ribs. Still, she had survived. And Dapo hadn't left her side since she was admitted. He came every morning, dressed down in joggers and hoodies, nothing like his usual flamboyant designer outfits. He brought flowers, books, even snacks she never touched. Sometimes he just sat there watching her sleep, replaying the accident over and over in his mind. She had run into the rain for him. She had bled for him. And not once had she asked for anything in return. By the third day, she was conscious enough to speak. "You're here again," she said softly, her voice raspy. "I haven't left," he replied, his eyes locked on hers. "You almost died, Amaka." She looked away, uncomfortable under his intense gaze. "You're the ogre. I couldn't just watch." Dapo shook his head. "Number, you're something else. I don't even know the word." He started visiting even more often. He bought her a new phone, though she politely declined it. He talked to her about things he never told anyone, how he hated pretending to be someone he wasn't, how he felt empty despite everything he owned. Amaka listened without judgment, always quiet, always kind. There was a stillness about her that calmed him, and it made him want more of her time, more of her honesty, more of her heart. Back at the mansion, the change in Dapo didn't go unnoticed. The parties stopped. The loud music, the parade of girlfriends, the flashy cars, they all faded into the background. Madame Obajemi confronted him one morning during breakfast. "You've been acting strange, Dapo. Running to the hospital every day for a maid? What nonsense is that?" "She saved my life, Mum," he said, cutting into his toast without looking up. "She did more for me than most of the people in this house ever have." His mother's eyes narrowed. "She's below you. You don't even know what kind of girl she is. All this might be planned. These girls use charm, or worse, jazz." He dropped his cutlery, the clatter sharp against the marble table. "I don't care what people think. Amaka's not like them." But gossip doesn't need permission to spread. The other domestic workers began whispering behind Amaka's back, accusing her of trapping Dapo with juju. One even swore she saw her bury something under the hibiscus tree. The house manager hinted to Madame Obajemi that Amaka had been seducing the young master even before the accident. The news reached social media eventually. A blurry picture of Dapo helping Amaka into a hospital wheelchair captioned, "From maid to madam." Amaka heard it all. She cried quietly at night when no one was watching. The attention was suffocating. The insults felt like sharp stones thrown at her soul. She begged the doctor to discharge her early and told Dapo she wanted to return to her village, far away from Lagos, far away from his world. But he held her hand and shook his head. "Number, you're not running." "Everyone thinks I used something on you," she whispered. "Then let them think. I know the truth. You gave without asking. You risked everything for me. I won't let this world punish you for that. They'll never accept me. I don't need their acceptance." Madame Obajemi issued an ultimatum. "Choose your family or that girl." Dapo looked her in the eye and replied, "Then I choose her." The news shook the Obajemi household to its core. Meetings were held. The family lawyer was called. Dapo even received a call from a business partner of his father, who warned him that marrying a maid would damage the brand. But Dapo no longer cared about the brand. He cared about Amaka. She had become more than a maid. She had become the only person who had seen him without all the layers, and still cared enough to stand in front of a moving car for him. In his heart, she was no longer just the girl from the servants' quarters. She was his miracle. The sun was already rising when Amaka zipped up the faded Ghana must-go bag that held the few belongings she had brought to the Obajemi mansion almost a year ago. a pair of shoes, a few clothes, and her mother's old Bible. That was it. She tied her scarf and looked around the small maid's quarters one last time, her heart heavy but resolved. Too much had happened, and the whispers had grown louder. Even though Dapo had stood up for her, she didn't want to be the reason his life fell apart. She tiptoed through the back entrance, hoping to avoid the stares and sneers of the other staff. The compound was quiet, unusually so. The guards had likely gone to the front gate. She had written a short thank you note to Madame Aubergemi, even though she was sure the woman would toss it into the trash. She had also scribbled a note for Dapo. She didn't have the strength to face him again, not after all the rumors, the fights, the press scandals. With trembling fingers, she opened the gate and stepped out onto the street. Lagos was already beginning to buzz with life. Okadas zoomed past. A street hawker shouted the price of bottled water. Amaka clutched her bag tighter and walked fast, her eyes low. She didn't want to cry. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? Then she heard it, the sharp honk of a car convoy. She froze and turned around slowly. 3 black jeeps were parked right in front of the gate. Traffic had halted. People were staring. Windows were rolled down. Phone cameras were up. Before she could move, the back door of the lead SUV flung open. Dapo stepped out. He was wearing a simple white kaftan and brown leather slippers, his hair slightly tousled, like he had gotten out of bed in a hurry. His eyes found hers immediately, and without hesitation, he walked straight to her. No bodyguards, no second thoughts. "Amaka," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye?" "I didn't want more drama," she whispered. "You think leaving quietly will erase what you mean to me?" he asked, stepping closer. She looked down, feeling the heat of 1,000 eyes on her. Passers-by had stopped. A street vendor dropped her tray of oranges in shock. Even one of the mansion guards had come out to watch. "I'm just a maid, Dapo. You don't owe me anything." He smiled, soft and sad. "You're wrong. I owe you everything." Then, without a second's delay, he knelt down on one knee. Gasps filled the air. Somebody screamed. A hawker dropped his cooler. "Marry me," Dapo said, holding out a small velvet box with a ring that sparkled brighter than the morning sun. "Not because you saved my life or because I owe you. Marry me because I can't imagine life without you. You see me, Amaka, the real me. And I see you, the real you, strong, honest, brave. Marry me." She stood there, stunned, her hand covering her mouth. Her heart pounded so loud it echoed in her ears. Everything around her slowed down. She could hear people recording, whispering, laughing, crying, but none of it mattered. All she could see was the man kneeling in front of her, not as the billionaire heir, but as the man who held her hand in the hospital when no one else did, who defended her when the world called her names, who chose her when it cost him everything. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, as if to drown out every voice that had ever called her just a maid. "Yes, Dapo, I'll marry you." The street erupted. Cheers, claps, shouts, and phones flashing everywhere. Traffic was backed up down the road. Within minutes, the moment was online. Blogs carried the headline, "From Maid to Madame Billionaire." Others mocked, "Another Cinderella jazz story." But Dapo didn't care. He lifted Amaka into his arms, right there in the middle of the road, kissed her forehead, and said, "Now let's go home." Back at the mansion, Madame Aubergemi nearly collapsed from disbelief. Calls came in from her society friends. Some called it madness, others destiny. But it was too late. Dapo had made his choice. And this time, no board meeting, no scandal, no threat could change his mind. A private engagement ceremony was held weeks later. Small, quiet, just family and a few real friends. Amaka wore a simple cream dress, her natural hair packed in a bun. She looked nothing like the maid she once was. She carried herself with grace, but her humility never left. When asked how it all happened, she would always smile and say, "I was just doing my job." And so, in a city where money often spoke louder than love, Amaka became the exception, not because she married a billionaire, but because she reminded everyone, from staff to strangers, that love, when real, has no class, no uniform. She was the girl they all ignored, but she became the queen of his heart. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more teachable and inspiring folk tales by FE.